Hello and welcome to With Wellman Anderson. This is the channel where we talk about economic, we talk about political, we talk about historical things in simple terms. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the gentrification of Los Angeles. Let me start out by saying the channel that I have is around the history on how Los Angeles became gentrified, how Los Angeles became to be such a major city, and more importantly, how you can identify what gentrification is knowing from its history. Let's start out from the beginning. What is gentrification? Well, gentrification is when one class of people, for financial reasons, displaces another class of people. It comes from the old word gentry, which is a French term, which means that was the nobility, the people in the middle, not the aristocracy and not the people on the bottom. It was coined by a lady named Ruth Glass, who was an economist in 1964 in London, who was tasked to look at issues of disparity. Before you gentrify anywhere, you must destroy the neighborhood. And that's done by doing blockbusting, by creating fear in a neighborhood, redlining, not providing financial services, the lack of police, private, and business sanitation and fire services to your neighborhood, zoning laws, giving developers tax credits for the future, restrictive covenants, not allowing you to sell a home to who you want to sell it to, white flight, the rent gap theory, where it's sometimes maybe cheaper to once the rent reaches a certain level to dispose of the property. And in Los Angeles, like a lot of other major cities, a lot of the gentrification is coming from Airbnb. Now, back in 1934, the Federal Highways Act under the Roosevelt administration built the first housing projects. There, in 1944, the Urban Renewal Program and slum clearance for urban blight began. They used eminent domain. In other words, the government could sell your house and give you the assessed value of the house. In 1949, the American Housing Act brought mortgages and insurance reform. This was sort of the beginning of white flight. In 1956, the Federal Defense and Highway Act came into effect under President Eisenhower. A brief anecdote on why he did that is when he was in World War I, he took a trip from the West Coast, East Coast to the West Coast. It took him, I believe, 20 or 30 days to get there, and he realized we had to build out a highway system, but I guess he didn't realize how it would affect a lot of the people. Brief history of Los Angeles. Los Angeles was purchased from Mexico in 1850. It became incorporated in 1850. After the Mexican-American War, California was part of the United States in 1848 to 50. There was a gold rush to Northern California. Manifest Destiny was the West was open up for people to move west. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave people the ability to buy land and build on it. The railroad, telegraph, and the first harbors to Los Angeles made it become the beginnings of a major city. But the big problem in Los Angeles was water. And in 1905, the aqueduct brought water to Los Angeles. That solved the major problem. Los Angeles has a large Mexican population, quite a large Japanese population. They were farmers. The Chinese built the railroads and built the docks. And the Great Migration in Black America from 1910 to 1930, from World War II and the Depression and the Dust Bowl, began to bring more people out to the West. But the main thing that impacted California, Los Angeles mainly, was air conditioning. Air conditioning was a major impact and people were able to move out there. The second wave of the Great Migration was between 1940 and 1970, where blacks started to move in. Now the next piece of this, we gotta go to Brooklyn. All right. In Brooklyn, there was Walter O'Malley. He owned the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was in a neighborhood that people didn't want to visit to see the Dodgers, so he approached a gentleman named Robert Moses, who is a whole different animal. He was the master builder in New York. And Robert Moses offered him a site where Shea Stadium was in Queens to move the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers in Queens. That didn't go well with Walter O'Malley. Walter O'Malley did, however, have 7 acres worth of property in Los Angeles that was owned, I believe, by a minor league team. So when Los Angeles approached him, they swapped the 4 acres for 200 acres at a place called CHAVEZ Ravine. Now, CHAVEZ Ravine is an old Mexican neighborhood that was fruitful, very nice neighborhood. And when the swap was done, they started to move people out of CHAVEZ Ravine to build the new Dodger Stadium. But one of the problems that came up is it was even political. I mean, there were things about communism and the Red Scare. It was totally blown out of proportion. The next thing, the Dodgers moved into CHAVEZ Ravine. Now, Los Angeles was, of all major cities, was late to the market of bringing transportation to its people. In the 70s, Los Angeles really didn't have much of an infrastructure for trains and light rail. That all began in about 1970, 1980. So what Los Angeles had was this huge build out of about 90 some odd stations and 100 miles of light rail and subway. This destroyed a lot of neighborhoods, but the interesting thing that happened is when they laid out these 93 stations, they slowly began to gentrify. They weren't gentrified immediately, but they slowly began to gentrify. So that sort of brought on the element of what is called transit-oriented development. I call it transit-oriented development gentrification. Now, in Los Angeles, some of the gentrified areas, the East LA, Boyle Street area, there are art galleries, condos, plenty of Airbnbs. Compton, which was well known in the 80s and 90s as a gang area, dangerous, infested with drugs, is now being gentrified. Compton Boulevard. I read that there are $400,000 homes in Compton. West Adams Street, a blighted area in the 70s and 80s, both black and Hispanic. There's tremendous gentrification going on there. Not to mention Baldwin Hills, Inglewood, the Crenshaw District. So that's basically the story on the history of the gentrification of Los Angeles. Now you have in the background that you can go and look and see what are the effects of the gentrification. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. I do need your subscription. And again, have a great day. Bye.